Thank you, Cathaoirleach. I think my colleague Deputy Doherty has outlined our position in relation to the bill, and I won't repeat that. But I do want to pick up on some issues, Minister, which he hasn't addressed due to time constraints. One of them, I suppose, is the contradictions in the briefing notes which were obtained by our office through Freedom of Information requests to the Department of Finance, to the Minister in the lead-up to this bill being published. There were briefing notes that were used for the press, briefing notes that were used when he appeared before Oireachtas committees, including the Parliamentary Budget Office, and actually some of the claims within the legislation as published. One of those was in relation to the issue of the withdrawal mechanism, and the Minister touched on it himself earlier when he said that one of the withdrawal mechanisms would have to be Dáil approval. Now, in fairness, the Minister did state that there would be an exception to that under Section 9, subsection 4, I think, of the bill in relation to not seeking Dáil approval. But the Minister, up to that point, has always said, and let me quote some of the things he has said, "It is my view that matters of national economic and financial importance should have the support and endorsement of not just the government, but also the Dáil." And then he puts into the legislation, when it's published, that we can actually sidestep Dáil approval if he decides it's in the national interest and it's a crisis. So how do we even come to that point? The legislation states that the Minister responsible for the introduction of the bill, which is the Minister for Finance, would have to consult with the Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform before bringing a proposal to government in relation to withdrawing monies from the fund. So in essence, Pascal will stand in the mirror and he'll ask himself, will I withdraw money from this fund? And if his reflection in the mirror says, yeah, Pascal, I think that's a good idea, let's go with it, then he'll bring it to Cabinet. If the Dáil is not sitting, then that's it, the money is withdrawn. So that's one of the clear contradictions in relation to what the Minister has been saying in the lead-up to this piece of legislation being debated here tonight and the actual publication and what's contained within the bill. And for me, it just highlights the government's approach to this legislation over the last number of months, the last 12 months, 18 months. It is make it up as you go along. It's a PR exercise. Let's portray ourselves as a party of fiscal prudence. Let's try and portray other parties who are asking the government to invest in housing, to invest in our health services, to invest in our public services at a time when people are sleeping on the streets, lying on trolleys, overcrowded conditions, people in direct provision, family hubs where children are actually at risk. They decide, no, let's set up a fiscal or a rainy day fund and let's put some money into that for future crises, completely ignoring the crisis that we are currently trying to navigate our way through. It's fiscally irresponsible to do what this government is proposing to do. And they know that, and you know that, Minister. And what you're trying to do is to set out some dark scenario where somewhere down the line in the future we're going to suffer a huge economic downturn, and we're going to be so glad we have this 8 billion in a fund, while ignoring the fact that there are many people within this state tonight who will sleep and they won't even have a roof over their head. And I just think that is not only fiscal irresponsibility, I also think it's morally irresponsible. One of the other areas, Minister, which I wanted to touch on is in relation to what the Minister has said in relation to the funds being used as a potential bank bailout. The briefing notes, again, state, and let me quote what they state. This is what the department is telling the Minister in relation to the potential use of this fund in bailing out banks. It says, we should caution against closing off future uses of the rainy day fund at this time, particularly given we do not know what crisis could be faced into the future. And that is including a stopgap measure for the banking sector. Now, it's in the legislation as well that this can be used to finance banks as a stopgap measure. And I just think that the public will not agree with this. They do not agree with this. We've seen what Fianna Fáil have led this economy to in relation to bank bailouts. My grandchildren and my great-grandchildren will still be paying for that. And I think it's a bit, to be honest, disingenuous of people like Michael McGrath to come in here and talk about other parties, such as myself and Pearse, trying to use this as a baton to beat the government with and, trying to portray us as people who are not responsible. This is the same guy who's the finance spokesman for the party who drove this economy off the cliff. And they come in lecturing us about being responsible with our public finances. I mean, brass necks doesn't even cover it when it comes to Fianna Fáil. And as I said at the start, I'm not surprised that Fianna Fáil are trying to portray themselves now as being, they've learned their lesson of the past. The Fianna Fáil I know will never learn their lesson of the past, and they're in it for themselves. And they make no doubt about it, Minister. They are looking at a couple of general elections down the line in the hope that they are someday sitting where you are currently sitting, and you have built up this massive fund of 8 billion. And what will they use it for? Well, their past history explains what they will use it for. So, Minister, the quicker we get into the committee stage and the quicker we get into the actual detail and away from the PR and the spin in relation to this legislation, the better for all of us. But I have no doubt that the public, when they understand what this bill or what this money could actually be used for into the future, when we could be using it now, right now, to build houses, to alleviate hospital waiting lists, I have no doubt, Minister, that they would not be supportive of this. And I would be surprised if some of the independent members of government were supportive of this. And people need to take a long, hard look in the mirror, just as Pascal will have to do when he brings a proposal before government to withdraw money from this fund. I think the quicker we get into committee stage and the quicker we start dealing with the details contained within the bill itself, the better. And I would hope that the government would actually listen to the reasonable voices within this chamber and not the likes of Fianna Fáil. Listen to what we're saying. Just open the ears, be open to listening to an alternative argument for once, because that is why we are where we are today. When governments refuse to listen to opposition, when they were putting forward reasonable and rational proposals in the past, they refused to listen to it. They thought they knew best, and look where it got us. So I would implore you, Minister, to ensure that this government doesn't repeat the mistakes of the past. However, I'm very sceptical whether that will happen or not. Time will tell.